Lean in, speak up. So I would say hi and welcome to everybody for BizDev in Challenging Time Part 2 Q&A session, or the Q&A inning. I'm seeing a lot of Bloomhouse horror at the moment. We're learning from the last BizDev panel, and when I say learning, this time I'm going to remember to actually mention that this is brought to you by XDS Spark, and please go visit our site for all your XDev needs, because I didn't do that last time. The session will be filmed in front of a live studio audience, so you can see a recording. We'll post up a link shortly after. I gave some very complimentary introductions last time to our brilliant panel. I don't know if I can quite bring myself to do it twice in a month, so I'm going to do a bit more of a brief welcome this time round. So I'd like to welcome Claas, Grimm, CFO from Sharkmob, Kirstin Whittle, VP of BizDev at Pipeworks, Mark Medlock, Senior Outsource Manager at Turn 10, and Dave Sanderson, External Dev Director at Phoenix Labs. So today what we're going to do is we're going to focus on some of the great questions we missed and we didn't get a chance to cover last time. I've paraphrased some of the questions. Quite a few of them were covering very similar areas, and I want to bring them together. So I'm going to roll off a quick list of names. And these are all the people who submitted questions that have been either munged or moved about or whatever, or maybe even quoted verbatim. So I'd like to say, oh, and also apologies for murdering your first name pronunciations here. So I'd like to thank Alejandro, Adika, Julian, Eli, Zach, Alejandro too, Vitor, Michael, Caiphas, Travis, Pierre, Shalmina, and Anonymous, who actually provided the most. So to get started, we'll keep the Q&A channel open again this time around, and we'll try and get 10-15 minutes towards the back end to be able to answer those questions. I will keep the chat session open as well, as you already participated in, and we'll also hold an anonymous poll as well, which Chris will put up for us as we begin, and we'll take a temperature on the results partway through the session and see if that can add to some of the conversations we've got going here. Only yesterday, the tide of bad news continued with Sumo announcing a round of layoffs, which struck very close to my heart and to Kirstin's as well, particularly as we were both ex-Sumo outs. So the first question is very on point, really, given the situation, which is, what do you feel is happening in the market right now? And I'll open that up to Claas.
Right. I think I answered this a little bit between the lines last time around, but what you read a lot is that maybe the games industry was overfinanced and studios were growing too much, and now they have to deal with the realities or the fallout of that. But I think that while you might find individual cases where that's true, that's kind of missing the bigger picture, because we are in one of the worst, if not the worst, financial crisis in a long time. There are very high inflation rates, unemployment, etc., etc. So what happens here is, and I mean, rising interest rates, everyone with a mortgage feels the pain. What that means is that essentially people have less money that they can spend, and that also means they will spend less on games. So this is the reality. If the market grew by 2 or 3% last year, with market I mean video game sales, but you have an inflation rate of 10%, that means you're in a shrinking market, right? And any company that needs to stay profitable needs to cut cost at least about 10% to stay at similar profitability. So, but when you want to show growth, you need to cut costs even further. So that's why you're seeing cuts of 10-15% typically when they get announced, to basically stay within those parameters. So what needs to change? So that's what's going on in the bigger picture. and what needs to change for that to turn around. Well, obviously inflation needs to come down. Consumer spending needs to go back up. So basically, the correction cycle needs to finish. How long does that usually take? And again, I'm not the super expert here, but typically people say it's a 5 to 10 year cycle that we're looking at. So this started in late 2021. So now we're in the third year, close to the fourth year. So hopefully this is the worst year, and 2025 will be the point where things turn around. It might be a year later. So that's when you hopefully will have, again, growing markets. And that's when demand also for external services or demand for production capacity can go up again. Until that happens, we are probably going to see more of 2024 going forward.
Hey, David. Thanks, Claas.
I would second everything that Claas has just said. I think to sort of build on that a little bit and why it's particularly relevant to external development, games are unbelievably expensive to make and complicated to make. And I mean, that's mostly true at the top end. There's certainly the entire indie cohort of things, but at the scale of games company that does large ongoing XDev contracts, those games are extraordinarily expensive and time consuming. And so the reality of that, we were able to stay ahead of it a little bit when the economy was booming. And when the economy is not booming, it reveals just how challenging that reality is of spending 100 or 200 or 300 or more $100 million to find out whether or not your product is going to hit. And there is to that extent, there's something kind of fundamentally broken in how we make games. And I think XDev is one of the ways that we are going to solve and mature as an industry of having a more lean supply chain and a more confront the reality that you just need to manage your risk much more aggressively, particularly early on in the process. So I think it is an incredibly painful process right now. Particularly, I mean, like yesterday's news is a big deal, and the Vancouver scene in particular is hurting pretty badly. I do think the light at the end of the tunnel in this, for me, is that it will force us to change how we make games and force us to produce games companies that are more sustainable. That is my hope, and that's what I want to contribute to.
Yeah, and maybe if I may just add a little bit to that to be not all doom. There's still the reality that a game can be successful and extremely profitable on an individual case, right? So that means you still have a lot of companies that will make a lot of profit, a lot of money, and do have the capital to then invest a lot into making games, hoping that it will be a success. So that's dynamic is still there. There's just less of that happening right now.
At risk of this turning into the David Claas show, one of the things that actually also makes me really hopeful is that when like the traditional model falls apart, everybody who was invested in the traditional model, some number of those people have a terrible experience and like, well, screw it. If I can't make my career making a game in the traditional way, I'm just going to go off and do the thing that I wanted to do. And so you sort of plant the seeds of a renaissance of like some truly wacky games. And like, I think we're actually hopefully at the early stage of a bunch of just absolute explosion of really unusual and creative and dynamic artistry, because people are being forced out of traditional models and try new things. And so some of it's going to be, some of them are going to crash and burn, but some of them are going to be amazing. And that's exciting to me.
I think I like the idea of seeing more variety and interest coming out there. Kirstin, do you see any causes for optimism?
I do. I'm ever hopeful, you know me. I mean, I think there are the challenges are everywhere, and they're very different for individuals and individual companies and teams within those companies as well. And I think it's trying to understand those challenges and seeing how you can support, how you can help, and also as a studio, we're all fighting for our lives right now. And there's some amazing talent across this industry, and it's just ensuring that we all continue to look out for each other, work together. And I think, and communities like this are so important, because understanding both sides of the table is really key, I think, to sort of have that mutual success. And we all want to see each other succeed, and the games that we make and contribute to get better. And the player experience ultimately is what the goal is here as well. I think I do think it's going to be a long road. I think people sort of often say, how long is it going to be until, like a bit like the pandemic, when's it going to get back to normal? I think the new normal is evolving. I think each day, each week is just what we've got to deal with, and focus on what you can see in front of you, what's going on in your world at any given time, and try and support what you can where you can. And also, I think with the studios as well, with the news that's gone on, certainly within Pipeworks yesterday, it was spending time with the teams to reassure that what we're doing as a studio, all of our decisions for the last sort of 8-9 months and beyond, have been about ensuring our stability and our success, and doing everything we can to protect our people and give them that security. And I know that's the ultimate goal for every studio, even the studios that have had to make really harsh decisions. It's always an absolute last resort. But what I do find encouraging is the way the community comes together as well to support each other. When you see the news light up the way it did yesterday, and it's been doing it it feels like every day. But yeah, I think this we're all here for each other, and I think ultimately we just want to support our community and make great product, and just hope that what we do adds value where it does, and I continue with that sort of same focus and quality.
So it has been great to see the community actually rally. We have been the largest, smallest industry in the world for a long time. It's great to see us come together. Mark, what's the view from somewhere like Xbox and within an established brand as well? How are you feeling the market shift?
I don't know that I want to speak for them.
Well, don't speak for it. Speak from the heart.
I'm gonna kind of +1 to a lot of the things that have already been said. I'm gonna say it feels like we're all trying to time the stock market right now, and guess when this is all going to come back around. And I don't know that you can do that. So to Kirstin's point, you have to run your business in a smart way, whether you're on the studio side or the XDev side. You got to not overstretch yourselves in these times. I think this is all kind of common sense stuff, but yeah, I mean, you just got to kind of weather the storm right now. And like I said, I mean, Claas probably has a better answer than any of us to, when it'll come back around, but it's still a big window that we're talking about. So like I said, you're trying to time the stock market. So until then, you've got to make smart business decisions on both sides of the fence to not overstretch yourself, so that you end up in a situation where you're starting to lay people off.
I mean, if we're going to try and sort of relate this back to specifically, I'm a biz dev manager, what do I do about this situation? From my perspective, what the pressure in the market is towards smaller teams, leaner teams, and lots of new companies popping up, right? Which also means like they have very limited skill sets because they are a small team. So that inherently means they're going to need more outsourcing in order to achieve their product goals. As a result, it also makes me think that I would be spending broadly less time trying to kick down the door of Electronic Arts or Microsoft or Sony and get over the due diligence wall. And I would spend more time trying to find the new incumbent shops that are opening up that maybe would need are more likely to need my services. B, they're easier hurdles to jump because like they're, if it's a 5-person studio, they don't give a shit about your security policies. They just want the work. The challenges that come with that is then you're sort of inherently skewing yourself more towards shotgun. And it definitely exacerbates the findability problem. You're like, okay, cool. There's lots of new game studios. Where? Like, how do I find them? Who is it? And like short of camping on LinkedIn all day, how do you actually turn that into sales for your business? Small plug for XDS Spark. Who knows? Maybe that's the place. But I think if I was in a sales role right now, I'd be paying more attention to the sort of disruptive parts of the industry and the younger parts of the industry for new work than I would be the incumbents. That might not be the right call, but that's kind of where my brain goes if I was in a sales role right now. I can see you thinking, Claas. I want to hear what you say.
No, I mean, I think who was it? Alexei said cancel Spark and save cost until next year or something like that. I think in times like this you have to compete more, right? I mean, not sure if Spark's the place, but you need to compete harder because you're fighting for a smaller amount of work that's out there, right? So, and if you know, if I was a salesperson or someone who's looking for work, basically, I would always think about what is everyone else saying, because if you're looking at 10 different suppliers of the same thing, you're gonna remember the one who has something interesting. So I would always think about who else are they talking to, what are they saying, say something else or address exactly that. So it's not a real formula, but that's how I would think, right? If you're trying to sell anything.
It's always a little bit strange, well, or counterintuitive that we quite often see spend or time on biz dev, so expend on biz dev, rein in during the hard times and expand during the good times, which seems the wrong way around to me. We may have less of the budget, so it may just be, hey, look, we can commit more money towards this, but you would think that really during the leaner times, the focus on biz dev would increase.
I think the other thing that comes to mind for me is we talk a lot about new biz dev and grow. I would also submit that you need, if I'm on the service side, don't take your eye off the ball, the thing that you have. Make sure that's working really, really well, because now's the time to be as sticky as possible so you don't lose that business to somebody else. Like you said, studios might be consolidating because they have less money to spend. So how do you make sure that if you're one of two, one of three, one of four vendors or suppliers, that they keep you?
That's very true, yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's always cheaper to keep customers than to find new ones.
Exactly. And you don't want to be in that kind of hamster wheel of always adding new and then everything else falls out the back door because you didn't take care of them once you had them.
Yeah. And that's
yeah, sorry, Kirstin.
So I was just saying that also can lead, like those strong partnerships that take years to build, then start to yield other. You start to work in other IPs across their studios or organization, whatever. And I think it's that thing of don't take anything for granted. Just don't the complacency element. If that starts to creep in, that's almost like not a kiss of death. It sounds too dramatic, but it's never good. I think you've always got to stay hungry, stay humble, and just try and think each day, like how do I with the role that I've got within my studio, within that IP, keep delivering, keep exceeding expectations, and looking for the next challenge, and just listening as well, because every person on that team is almost they are an extension of biz dev, because they're talking to the studio, their peers in that team all the time. They will pick things up, they will hear things, and it's important from a biz dev perspective to stay in tune to those conversations, so you do keep ahead of what things are, and that intelligence you're getting ahead of the market because you're already there. You're in that kind of conversation, so maximize that and just always take time to listen to it as well, because there's usually more than you think, and they're the fun things, because that's where you find the nice surprises, and there are surprises still around. They're obviously harder to unearth, but they're there, and I think you just got to be open to listening and being the right place, the right time, and just being everywhere. It's always on it feels like it is always on at the moment, I think, and that's the nature of our role, and that's why we do what we do, I guess, because we like that kind of crazy lifestyle. But I think it's a challenge, and I think sumo, my time at sumo was during the pandemic, and it was almost working with like allocation, because there was just so much work. It was crazy. It was just insane. Whereas now it's you're leaning on your sort of biz dev skills now, what you've learned over years of doing what you do, to really hunt and find and get creative, work with your partners, work with your contacts, work with your peers as well. There's connections everywhere, and just kind of keep ears and eyes open all the time.
I think simply put, the biggest sales I ever got were through account management, not through cold calling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that leads us on to the next question, which may have actually gone quite a ways into already answering, or certainly on the maintain side, which was, do you have any suggestions on how to approach a client for those longer term commitments?
Don't expect everything day one. I think.
So, is that the advice? Because it's certainly something I've seen is that long-term commitments tend to grow. They don't tend to appear. They tend to...
No, you've got to earn your place. I think it's like any relationship, any friendship. You don't become best friends, from meeting. Maybe develop bar one night, maybe, but you've got to prove yourself and show that you can be that trusted team that can support. And sometimes a project can start with the smallest, like two, 3 people, and then fast forward 12 months and that team's grown into 50. And those are so satisfying to watch evolve. And I think, again, it's the thing of paying attention to the details and staying close to things. But yeah, just you've got to put the time in. You've got to show you care. You've got to just be with them and understanding their challenges and figuring out the problems together, I think. And when you get to that true sort of XDev CoDev partnership, those kind of long-term arrangements are amazing, because you then just feel like you become an extension of their own teams. And it's nice when you see the team. And I've got a project at the moment that the studio we're working with was rewarding our team exactly the same way they were rewarding their staff, and that's just so great to see. And it means so much on every level, because they're treated as they are. They're contributing massively into an IP the same way that people are within that organization. So it's nice to see that. But that, again, that didn't happen overnight. It takes time. You've got to demonstrate that level of can do.
So it's not so much you're approaching the client for a longer term commitment, you are building a longer term commitment.
I think I would probably approach this from a bit more competitive angle, but the more commoditized your service is, the more important it is to think competitive, because you want to think, who else is my client working with? What are they doing differently? How are we different? How are we better?
Okay.
And you can, I think, ask this, and it's not a guessing game, right? But you want to stay on top, right?
I mean, accurately understanding your own business really matters as well. Like, if you're able to go into a conversation with a buyer or prospective buyer, and that, like, if it's less than 5 people, this isn't going to make sense for my business. Like, it's okay to know that answer and to go in and set that expectation. Like, it's actually a good thing to be able to have an honest conversation with the people that are prospectively going to be buying your services, for you to say, like, listen, less than 5 doesn't make sense. And, like, realistically, we can't scale beyond 30 or whatever it is. And so that, like, setting accurate expectations with your buyer builds trust, right? We're like, this is the kind of problem that we're good at solving. And so when you have that kind of problem, think about us. Like, that's kind of the piece that you're talking about. Also, Kirstin's 100% right that, like, the piece of this, why it starts small and tends to grow, is that's like a trust-based growth. The thing that the corollary to that is, if you go in and say, the only way for us to work with you is at, like, large commitment, long-term, large scale, the threshold of due diligence goes way up, because then, like, that buyer has to go to somebody like Claas and say, like, I want a huge amount of money and I want to commit it all up front. The standard of, like, proving that that's a good idea is way higher than, like, we want to spend a little bit of money on a couple of folks because it might work, might not, but if it's great, we'll scale it up. If not, no big deal, right? Like, one of those decisions is really easy to make comparatively, and one of them is really hard to make. And broadly speaking, if I'm trying to win new work, I want to make the decision easier
That makes a lot of sense.
I think you also, outside of the building trust and whatnot, you need to look at the project work that you're signing up for. Does it make sense to ask for a long-term deal? Like, what if they only have like 6 months to go? What if they can't even tell you what's beyond 3 months? Like, they're not going to sign a long-term deal because they don't know, and they don't know if they can feed you for that long. So, just
I think realistically, right? I mean, we both work for bigger organizations, and it's pretty standardized how you can go about these things. Do you want to argue with the procurement department? And in all reality, if the project allows for 8 months of work, then you're gonna get those 8 months of work. Regardless what's in the contract or not, right? If you renew every month or not, the only difference you have is when it comes to termination. So how fast can a client terminate? So that gives you a little bit of extra security, which of course is, not so easy to negotiate. But if the project work is 24 months, if that's what the project allows, if that's what the plan is, then you will get that regardless what type of contract terms you're on, right? So I think it's sometimes a difficult hill to die on for contract terms. But what you don't get by default is the transparency on, okay, how is it going? Is everything okay? Are we still looking at 6 months? So that's something you need to probably ask for specifically.
I feel like we've gone down the path of how not to go about it, or what to expect and how not to go about it. So I kind of want to switch to what would I suggest to somebody if they're in a situation where they can get, there's a possibility of a longer term commitment. I think, Kirstin's absolutely right. Trust and showing that you've been able to do that job. So you have an existing relationship, you're showing you can do that job. You see that there's work that's got a couple years remaining. I think then it turns to how would you structure a deal that would interest your client? Like, what is going to sweeten that deal? Like, what makes me interested? I'd want to know how you're going to scale and how you're going to train people. I'd want to know what the cost model would look like. If I'm giving you basically a volume deal, what are you going to do for me? So I think it's thinking about how you're going to structure the deal that will make it good for you as well as for your client, because you're getting something out of this. You're getting a long-term building block that you can just stack on and talk about. Hey, I'm signed up with this, XYZ studio for 2 years and we're doing all this great work. That's great. You can build on that. So there's got to be some, I guess there's got to be some sweetener for both sides.
There is a benefit for a supplier in having a long-term contract. It allows them to build, it allows them to hire. I'm going to switch up a little bit here. Chris, if you'd like to bring in the results of the poll, that'd be great.
I think I can just, in the meantime, just quickly on top of what Mark just said, like what can you do to sweeten the deal if you want a long-term commitment? I think the 2 points are typically administration and flexibility. So do you want to renegotiate every month or every 3 months? Can we just, can't we just get rid of that and sign some bigger volume deal? Can be non-committal. And also, hey, we are switching up work all the time. Assignments change. Do we always want to renegotiate the SOW, or can we just get on a bit more of a blanket type of deal and then have more flexibility? So that's when you can leverage a bit of the trust that's been established before.
Yeah, that's, again, as we're waiting for this poll to come through, the idea of statements of work that are both accurate descriptions of expectation and leave room for easy change, there's a rate card in it, and we all agree that, like, if these stakeholders say via email to suffice that we're going to change it up, like, cool, like, make it easy for everybody involved to keep the train moving. That's amazing. Yeah, there's definitely there's a whole conversation to be had on what does a good statement of work look like versus not.
I have this type of discussion every week.
So to answer the question, we have no difficulties finding new business, only 5%. So that was, they had no difficulties, there's no big surprise there. In 2024, how concerned are you for the survivability of your company? Our current trajectory, we will likely close doors, 1 out of 57 to 2%. Hear that, but it's good to see that 98% still feel confident. Too much uncertainty to give you an informed response, and they're confident they remain solvent at 67%. That's still quite a lowish number, really, given our industry. 67% is not overly inspiring. So I think the level of nervousness is high, and I'm not surprised as LinkedIn has now become a version of doom scrolling. When do you think the market will see significant improvement? Nobody thinks it's going to happen anytime soon. 3 months. I mean, I remember at the start of the year, Q3 was when the optimists were looking at the uptick, and that just seems to be slipping away the longer the year goes on. 6 months time, so start of just the beginning of 2025. 8 months and over 8 months. So the majority are pushing towards a year or so away. The survive to 25, I think, is still very much in people's minds. So just open to the panel. Is there anything on there that's surprising, or is that kind of in line with what you'd expect from them?
The first thing that comes leaping out at me is number 3, because as service providers, folks tend to specialize in services that are more or less in demand at different points in the product's life cycle. So I would be really interested to parse that data between like marketing folks versus concept versus, engineering. Like I think I would be curious to see if that changes the data based on when people tend to fall in the production pipeline.
Yeah. It's one of the things we're seeing across quite a few of the entertainment industries. A lot of the services that exist in our area are in full or post-production. So until the machines start kicking back in again, we've still got a long way to go before the majority of the work is actually generated. Well, thank you everybody who participated in that poll. We'll make sure that's there as well. Really important. So here's a question for you, as in, how can a premium service provider who cannot, will not compete on cost, identify and connect with buyers, especially a less veteran assessment of value, and have budgets that follow through on it? So how can those ones that will not compete on price or cannot compete on price, how can they still be attractive given the market with the press market state?
That's an interesting one. I think we've all got to be agile to a degree with our business models, because the landscape is what it is right now. But equally, as we know, good people come at a premium as well. So, and that's what you want to plug into. When you're talking to a AAA IP, they want the best of the best. They want, which is absolutely understandable, and that's why they're talking to you. And that does have an impact on rates. No shying away from it. Even in a challenging time, it's still, the salaries are the salaries, because people, as we've all got the economics going on around us, individuals have those same challenges. So salaries need to be in that ballpark, which does impact the rate ultimately. But I think the way that I kind of would approach it is looking at the companies that you're approaching, the IPs that you're approaching as well. How critical are they to your audience that they have to succeed? And you then start to align teams with certain IPs, maybe as an idea, that are the cannot fails, the pillars of that company that have to succeed, have to work. Or you work with a team. If budgets are tight, you get creative with the business model, and you start to think, okay, how can we onboard something, show you what we can do, show you the value. And also sometimes I found this actually quite a bit with certainly when I was at Sumo actually for a while, where we would pitch a really great team. The idea would land brilliantly, but it was just too expensive. So the partner would go away, go somewhere else, and then literally 8 months later would come back saying that's ended up costing us double because we went down a lower cost option, which people have to have certain criteria in place at the time. We understand that, but then it ultimately ended up costing a lot more to kind of regain that time. They've lost 6 months in dev windows, and we all know how precious the days are right now when you're trying to work towards the street date. So it's trying to explain and show where you bring the value. Yes, there is an investment, but there's an investment for a strong reason. And you've built a strong team. If your studio has heritage, talk about that heritage. Don't be afraid to remind people the games that you've worked on, the heritage of the teams and the people, the individuals in that team as well, where they've come from, what they've worked on. And it's incredible when you start to look at the plethora of logos that are usually around your own studio, where people have gained knowledge, and that is valuable. And I think people, when they understand that value, you can then start to have stronger commercial conversations. And sometimes there are companies that absolutely cannot, they just don't have funds, and then sometimes there's different ways that you can work business models. You can maybe look at a royalty share if there's something you have to work around something, then look at different ways to achieve the revenue targets that you've got as a biz dev person, but equally start offering that creative solution to the partner as well. Difficult.
Yeah. I would strongly encourage sales. Sorry, Claas. I'm going to say a bunch of things that you're going to disagree with.
Go ahead.
I would strongly encourage folks on the biz dev side, particularly folks early in their career, to remember that cost is not the same thing as dollars. So the idea of how much it costs to work with a particular partner is much more, at least in my experience, it's much more about quality and time than it is the dollars. The dollars are ultimately flexible. There are extremes on that, but this is exactly what Kirstin's saying. It's like there are ways to structure deals. You can structure deals a million different ways. What you can't do is have more hours in the day or have more time available. So competing on cost alone is almost never a good idea, simply because the service that you provide, price point is almost certainly not the only thing, and probably not even the most important thing that's being judged. It's much more likely that you're going to be like, we have found the partner we want to work with. I really want to work with Kirstin, and I'm going to work with Kirstin to find a way to how do we make the numbers work so that we can work together. That it is Kirstin came in at $1,000 a day and Claas came in at $900. Therefore, Claas is better, right? It's really important to stay, at least keep an eye beyond the dollars and what value you're bringing. Because I think if you're just trying to be we're going to win more work by dropping our day rates, I don't think that's going to work for you.
So how do you convince somebody who's looking at numbers? No, I'm kind of looking at you here, Claas. How do you convince somebody who's working with numbers that there is value behind those numbers? That it's not easy to quantify?
Yeah, I mean, first I would say if you don't want to compete on price, you compete on something else. So if you look at cars, you have some cars that compete on price. You have Ferraris or whatever, Mercedes, they don't compete on price. They're not the cheapest. They bring something else that people want. And it could be that it's extremely rare, hard to find, or it's just super good or super fast or whatever. So that's really the short answer. You just bring something else to the table. And if you actually want to compete on price, you really have to compete on price, right? So then you have to be actually really, really cheap. So I think it's fine to compete on price, but then you have to go all the way, and that's not so easy as well. So how do you convince someone that there's value? I mean, I can just maybe reflect a little bit how it works in the studio that I'm working right now. I'm actually not trying to limit production what they want. For my part, I just want them to give me a good reason. And we do work with some companies that are top end of the price hierarchy, and we work with a lot of them that are not. But it has to make sense. So if you really want to spend a high amount on some it has to be specialized work, really good, hard to find. So that's the scale that you're operating on. If you're clearly delivering something that can be bought somewhere else for half the price, then you're not competing well on the thing that you're actually competing on.
Yeah, I think different services are, how do I put this? Different services have different markets. If you're in a highly commoditized market, I'm not going to pay for a premium. I'm not going to pay a premium for that. If you're doing something niche that is a really hard skill to find, and your price is reasonable, maybe a little bit higher than the other, and you can convince somebody that you're offering a great service. It's like Claas said, I'm guessing that he may sit in the room and people come to him and ask for the money, but he's looking to others for the expertise to say, yes, this is the supplier we should use, and here are the reasons why.
Correct.
But we do, our market does have different price points, global price points all around. So they're offering the same kind of service. So we have art studios in Europe, we have art studios in the US, we have art studios in India, Southeast Asia, and China. So they're all offering the same kind of art services at different price points. So I guess really in that situation, is it communication? Is it experience? Is it time zone? Is it quality of turnaround as a result of all those coming together that you're telling? So maybe you're telling a different story for the value that you're giving to each one of those clients, even though you're talking centuries.
Then it's really going to come down to what's important to the studio itself. So I can't answer that. This is a hard one to answer. Some studios may think it's super important to have similar time zone, and you're right. If you're in the US, that means you might pay more money. But others may be purely looking for somebody that has decent quality, but the cost is more important to them. Each studio is in a different spot, and it cycles. So I don't know how to give a like one solid answer for this. There's a lot of there's a lot of factors that play into it.
Okay.
I'm just typing it in the chat here, but I just be realizing that the chat doesn't show up in recordings. In my experience, predictability is really important as a thing to provide us from a service provider perspective. Like, we say we're going to do the thing for X amount of money, and if delivering on that is really, really important to the internal business case, because what you don't want to do is put your XDev manager in a position where they have to go to a Claas and say, I know I said it was going to cost 100 grand, but it's actually going to cost 200. Like, coming in late, that's bad. Like, the invoice is much bigger. It is about like a plan that we can all align on. That's great. So don't like unexpectedly pop the tires in the car. That was a terrible analogy. Claas, can you?
Luckily, that never happens in games.
Make people like Claas's life easy. That's what I'm saying.
I'm going to try and leave 10 minutes. It seems somehow grossly unfair to miss out on some of the questions from the last Q&A, so we can fit in a couple of questions from this Q&A dedicated session. But just because this question leads on from what we're talking about, I'm going to put this one to you before we move on to tackling some of the questions that might be on the session, which is, what's your advice for a development engineering service company when you've got nothing concrete to show? So it's, with art and a lot of the other creative services, there's something to show. If you are an engineering company, especially a newish one, what is it? How do you put yourself forward to be considered in the first place?
Good luck.
Tell a good story. No, so I'm not a software engineer, right? So I have background in certain kinds of things, and so when I talk to service providers that do those kinds of services, I have an enfranchised opinion, and I can bring my judgment to bear on whether or not I think they're good for whatever problems that is. I don't know squat about being a good software engineer, but I'm still the guy that's telling the story internally. So if you can describe to me the kind of problem that you solve in a way that I can share internally, that is the most valuable thing. So, like, for example, there was a group that I talked to at a previous XDS, and they're like, we built these particular kinds of tools for Unreal in this particular game, and what those tools did is they unlocked this result. You're like, rad. The next time I hear somebody on my team say we're struggling with performance, and we need better tooling in Unreal, I know the guy. Right? Tell a good story that's repeatable.
I like what Lupien says in the chat. That's probably a good one.
What does it say?
Book a discovery call with engineers from both sides present and let them go at it.
Stand back.
Yeah, and that's not bad actually. You know, you need to put then people who are in the know so they can at least talk shop and convince that way, right? Not a bad.
That's
But
not
having a good track record is always gonna make things easier. So for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and again, speaking to the portfolio part from earlier, I think looking if you've created an engineering studio and you've obviously gone out and recruited people that for their skill set, they have obviously a proven background wherever they come from, and they've got their heritage. So look at stories within that. Look at, as Dave was saying as well, look at the challenges that they've solved and build out how you can be best at, obviously, UE5 are releasing new toys in the engine all the time. Get ahead of that, get on the, get with those groups, understand what's coming down the pipe, and become the group of people that know how to execute on the next big thing. And I think, and just stay connected and go to conferences is vital, because you will mix with people, you'll hear people's challenges, and you can go, you know what, I can help you with that. Let me and sometimes it might not be the biz dev person that connects, it might be one of the engineers that's speaking to a fellow engineer. But use that intelligence and just stay connected, because engineering is always a hot topic, and there's never enough of engineers. I think wherever I've been, we always need more. So I think that should be something to be excited about. So if there's new engineering studios popping up, just look at your team, your heritage within your team, and figure out, there will be a story that you can start to present and start to share, and write case studies, do these kinds of events. There's lots of people that are willing to listen.
Okay, that's great. That's great. I realize we're kind of getting towards the end now, so I'm going to let Chris hop in, and could you put a question or two out of the Q&A ad, which has been very active during this session.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the questions, and I'll thank Lev for being patient as he entered his question about 45 minutes ago. So Lev from Retro Style Games, he asks, as we see right now, many large developers, publishers are led by economists and investors / shareholders. Securing profits is usually a priority for them. Also, time difference is something that most studios have started tolerating. Do you think that such large AAA developers will outsource more capabilities to more affordable regions in comparison to less affordable regions? So say Asia, Middle East, instead of, for example, the US or Europe. And if so, will US or European outsourced studios suffer from that reality? Do you notice any trends with respect to this?
Maybe I can get at some of this. I think, yes, the big companies are at the stock market and shareholder value and all that, but I mean, Mark can maybe also speak to that, being part of one of those big MNCs, but a lot of the people who are calling shots and are in the executive suite are very passionate about the products and the financial and business side. They are there too, but they are different people. So you always, it doesn't become all business at the top. Let's say that. At least that's my experience. Now for the prices, I think actually Eastern Europe is not that far away from Southeast Asia price wise, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Will there be a higher demand for, let's say, cost sensitive options? I think so. And now I could talk an hour about why I think so, but let's leave it at that.
So yeah, there's bound to be some more pressure, but you've all got your reasons for offering the service that you've got at the price point that you've got them at. Is there any other questions in there that you'd like to to bring up, Chris?
Yeah. Question from Christoph. What is the most effective ways to follow up with connections made at XDS or any conference for that matter to engage in business while considering timing and providing additional information?
I think I'll jump in there. Focusing on what that conversation was with them and delivering what they asked for. If we go into a conversation, or if I go into a conversation with somebody and I tell them I'm looking for, photorealistic art, and they send me a portfolio of their stylized art, I'm kind of like, okay. So really taking good notes. And I know that, I'm brain dead by the end of XDS. Like there's so many conversations that you're having, but taking good notes, so that you can really do a good job of following up on what you spoke to each individual about, not just a generalized response.
I think there's a certain courtesy aspect to it that's really powerful, where you say, hey, we met at XDS. I was the guy who said this thing. We chatted about our kids, or like we were walking back from that party together down the street and had a good conversation. Like Caiaphas, for example, was, fell in Trinidad. Like just give you it doesn't need to be big, but just enough hooks where you're like, oh yeah, that conversation, I know who this person is. And then kind of get into it is really like, at least I personally, I find that really, really helpful. And then to sort of build on what Mark said, if there are meaningful new things where it's like, hey, at XDS, we talked about this trailer that was coming out and I couldn't show you yet. And now I can. Here it is. Right. That kind of stuff is helpful.
I could share some experience here as well, because I've been on both sides at XDS, selling and buying. Now, I thought that buying is easier because you have to listen more. I found it's actually more exhausting, because you're not really pushing the pace. But I noticed that after, let's say, 30-40 meetings that you got at XDS, on day 2, I forget half of the meetings. I literally don't know what happened then. I have these conversations with my team. It's like, who was this again? Like, I forgot, because it's so much. So I think you have, just to second what everyone else was saying, I think helping people a little bit with their memory on, maybe I'm too old, but it's like those things, it definitely helps.
I'd completely second, third, fourth, all of that, and I think it's, and sometimes I also remember sometimes when it's a European going over to Vancouver, remember they might take a week extra just to have a holiday as well. So don't stress if they don't ping you straight back. They could be traveling, they could be doing other stuff, but I think it's that thing of having the cadence of when to follow up as well, when to chase, when to reconnect, and I think always having something to share and news to share helps those subtle nudges that you might have to make here and there. But I think it's just note taking. I've got a head like a sieve, so everything gets written down. Otherwise it didn't happen. So I think making sure you've got everything succinct, and start planning your follow-ups straight away, because they always take longer than you think they will, because you're back into your day world again and other stuff is going on. So you've got to fit all your follow-ups or your next steps alongside what's going on in the real world as well. So just do bear that in mind.
I don't think being the person who sends their follow-up the fastest is what wins the day. I think it's the person who sends the most quality. Like, what was it out of our conversation that you remembered and you're sending me, and those little personal things I see showing up in chat, those are all great. So
those are all the hooks that you can actually remember somebody by.
Yeah.
And you're right. And if you can send something, for me, it was always if somebody sent me something that was something that was cool, that was a follow-up, that was actually, because what we tend to get is, hey, is there work now available? Can we continue this conversation? What I'd like to see is, remind me of something that was in your portfolio. Remind me of something that done, or something that just come out of NDA to jog and keep that memory together. So when the chances do come, you are somewhere near the top of my mind. I remember who you are. And I always remember that most of my replies to anything follow-ups at XDS began with, I am so sorry for the amount of time it has taken for me to reply to your email. It was almost a cut and paste. And I am still to this day very sorry for the amount of time it has taken for me to reply to your email. I realize that we are now at time. I would like to thank our fantastic panelists again for coming up, and also to our fantastic people in the chat and in the Q&A for keeping this rolling and all the great points. So thank you so much.